Around 14 minutes after midnight on the night of the 29th, we suddenly came across a Japanese submarine, and even now, when I talk about it, I don't just explain what happened, I slip right back into that moment. I can practically see it, hear it, and feel it all over again. Back when I was 18, I spent most of my time helping out on the farm and trying to finish high school. I knew exactly what was happening out in the Pacific, and one day I just told my dad, "Dad, I don't want to sit around waiting to get drafted. I want to join the Marines." I even said I'd go down to the draft board myself and let them know that even though my number hadn't been called, I wanted in. They seemed pretty thrilled. After all, a 17-almost 18-year-old kid volunteering for the Marines wasn't something they saw every day. So off I went to boot camp in San Diego. And after I made it through that, they pulled me aside and said, "Prophet Harold, you've been chosen for sea school," which basically meant I'd be serving aboard a ship. I spent about 6 weeks training, and when that wrapped up, they sent me up to San Francisco. From there, they marched me right down to the docks, and there she was, the USS Indianapolis, towering over everything. They told me that ship would be my home for the rest of the war. The Indianapolis was a heavy cruiser, and once I was aboard, I found myself right in the heart of the Pacific Campaign. The Allies were pushing hard to undo the brutal expansion of Imperial Japan, and I was part of that long, grinding fight. I went through something like 10 battle stars with that ship, Kwajalein, Saipan, Tinian, Guam, and the Great Sea Battle of the Philippine Sea, where our task force shot down 403 Japanese planes in a single day. I was at Iwo Jima, and then at Okinawa. And it was off Okinawa where we took a suicide plane. One of the bombs tore straight through the ship, leaving a huge, gaping hole that forced us to limp all the way back to the States for repairs. That detour changed the rest of my time in service, no question about it. Once we made it back to the California coast, the Indianapolis got patched up and returned to fighting shape. Not long after that, she received orders for a top-secret mission, one that would ultimately shape the end of the war and, truth be told, change my life too. We were assigned to pick up a classified cargo, and at the time I was a corporal standing guard duty. My Marine captain came up to me and said, "Something's coming aboard. We don't know what it is, but it's one enormous crate." Naturally, I asked what exactly we were guarding, and he just said, "We don't know." Before long, 2 men who were supposed to be Air Force officers boarded the ship. They carried a small canister locked inside a metal cage. I remember wondering who they were and what in the world they were carrying. Turned out, they weren't Air Force at all, they were scientists from Los Alamos, New Mexico. And inside that canister was the uranium component for Little Boy, the device that would trigger the first atomic bomb. At the time, I had no idea what we were handling. President Truman knew, of course. By July 16, they'd already detonated the first atomic bomb out in Los Alamos. Soon after that, we got underway, pushing the Indianapolis as fast as she would go. When we reached Tinian, a team came aboard and took both the big crate and the small canister. With our delivery completed, the Indianapolis turned toward the Philippines to get ready for the planned invasion of Japan. The truth is, our ship never made it to where it was supposed to go. On the night of the 29th, right around 14 minutes after midnight, we crossed paths with a Japanese submarine. And every time I talk about that moment, it becomes more than just telling a story. I slip right back into it. I can see it happening, hear it all over again, feel every second of it. That night, I'd gotten off watch at midnight. I went below deck, grabbed my blanket, and then headed topside. I walked all the way forward to the number 1 turret, made myself a little pallet on the deck beneath those huge gun barrels, and had just started to drift off to sleep. Somewhere around 11 or 12 minutes past midnight, Commander Hashimoto spotted us through a tiny periscope barely poking out of the water. We couldn't see him at all, but he could see us plainly. We didn't have any underwater detection gear, and they'd sent us out without an escort. It even surprised him that a ship like ours was sailing alone. He launched 6 torpedoes. When that first one hit, I didn't know exactly what it was, but I sure knew something had gone terribly wrong up front. I saw water and fire shoot high into the air, and just a couple seconds after that, another torpedo slammed into the ship right under the number 2 turret, the big 8-inch guns. I looked over and realized that nearly a 30-foot section of our hull, maybe even more, was just gone. Water poured in fast, and right then I knew the Indianapolis was doomed. Men started rushing out from inside the ship, and I could see many of them were flash-burned. Some were so desperate to escape that when they touched a bulkhead, the skin from their palms stuck right to the metal. They staggered out into the open, begging for help, but there wasn't a thing a Marine corporal like me could do in that moment. By then the bow was already underwater. The ship was listing hard to starboard, so steep you could barely stay on your feet. All we could do was wait for the order to abandon ship. Our captain didn't have any electrical power, no intercom, nothing, so the only thing he could do was shout at the top of his lungs. Abandon ship! Abandon ship! Abandon ship! I moved toward the rail, grabbed hold of it, and knew with absolute clarity that either I was going to leave this ship, or this ship was going to leave me. As I held on to that rail, I prayed. And believe me, there are moments in life when prayer comes naturally, and that was one of them. I knew exactly who I was talking to. I told the Lord I didn't want to die, not there, not like that. I thought about a certain brunette back home who was waiting for me, and about my mom and dad. I probably made promises I can't even remember anymore. All I knew was that I wanted to live. I wanted to live. And let me tell you something. I can still hear his voice even now. Peace I give unto you, not as the world gives. Let not your heart be troubled. Don't be afraid. I held that rail and heard it again. Don't be afraid. And deep down, I knew somehow, that I was going to survive. What I didn't know was what the next 4.5 days were going to hold. I finally left the ship, swam away just far enough to see the bow disappear beneath the water and the fantail lift high into the air. I watched boys jump off the ship, some of them falling straight into the giant screws as they churned downward. They couldn't see what waited below, but they knew staying on board meant being pulled under. Before long, around 80 of us gathered into a small group. I called out, asking if there were any Marines. 2 answered. One was a brand new Marine who'd just come aboard back in San Francisco. I didn't know him, he wasn't in my squad, but I could see he was badly wounded. He was dying, and I held on to him as best I could. He passed away right there in my arms. Then I found another Marine, my buddy Spooner. He had gone into the water head first, and you can imagine what that would do to a man when the surface was coated in a half-inch of thick, black oil. He couldn't see anything. He was choking and fighting for breath, completely panicked and desperate. There's a long story behind everything Spooner went through out there, more than I can tell in a moment. He had so much to face, all at once, just like the rest of us. When morning finally broke, you could look out at any time and see a huge fin carving slow circles around us. We were right in the shark's path, and they didn't care who was in the way. They'd bump into a man without even trying to miss him, and that was the end of him, just like that. Every now and then you'd spot someone drifting off by himself. Then you'd hear a scream that cut right through your bones, and when you looked, 2 or 3 sharks were already dragging him under. You'd go check a buddy floating nearby, and sometimes you'd find that everything below his waist was gone, completely torn open. That kind of thing happened over and over and over again. Then the sun came up, and let me tell you, nobody welcomed it. It must have been about 110 degrees out there. We had no water, nothing to drink, and a few men got desperate enough to try seawater. But give it a little time, once that salt hits the brain, the mind just unravels. A man loses all sense of direction. He looks at you and can't even tell who you are. Some of them slipped into hallucinations so deep they thought their own buddy was a Japanese soldier, and they'd try to stab him. We were losing men fast. At one point a little rain cloud drifted above us, and we all lifted our mouths, grateful for even a few drops. But our faces were coated in thick black oil. You'd try to catch the rain, maybe funnel it in with your hands, but the moment that oil and water got into your stomach, your body forced it right back out. So we went right back to having no water at all. By the third day, around noon, there were about 17 of us left. Then suddenly someone shouted, "Look! Look over there!" We spotted something in the distance, looked like it might be a raft. We started heading toward it, and before long, the men on it paddled toward us instead. When they reached our group, they said, "The sun sets in the west, and the Philippines are somewhere out that way. We're going to head toward the Philippines." We didn't know it was another 500 miles, but at that point, doing something, anything, felt better than just waiting to die. They asked if anyone wanted to join them. I turned to Spooner and said, "I'm going. You coming with me?" But deep down I knew he was thinking about ending his life. He told me, "I'll swim down so far I'll drown before I come back up." I grabbed him and said, "No, you won't. You're coming with that little raft, and that's final." Some of the sailors told us we were crazy. "You can't swim to the Philippines," they said. We answered, "Maybe not, but we'll never make it if we don't try." So we pushed off with the raft. The sailors who stayed behind? Not one of them survived. We made some progress, riding the swells, when I spotted something floating in the distance. I told the others I was going to check it out. They said, "It's probably just debris," but something inside me said I needed to go. I swam out to it, and when I got close, I saw it was an old slatted crate. And inside that crate, believe it or not, were potatoes. I reached in and grabbed one, and the rot just squished through my fingers. They were rotten all the way around, but when I squeezed, the inside was still solid. I peeled off the rotten part, spat it out, and ate the tiny bit of good potato that was left. My buddies saw me eating something and called out, asking what I'd found. I made my way halfway back, met them in the water, and shared what I could. That was our water. That was our food. Potatoes and hope, what kept us alive for 4.5 days of swimming. We couldn't all cling to that little raft, but we stayed close, doing everything we could to survive. My buddy Spooner, the same one who had wanted to take his own life out there, I grabbed him and said, "Spooner, turn around. I'm tying you on so you can't slip away." I wasn't about to lose him. When daylight came on that fourth morning, we realized we had drifted away from that little makeshift raft. Somehow it was just me, a Navy lieutenant named McKissick, and one other sailor. Every so often, I kept checking on that sailor, because by then I'd seen too many men simply let their heads fall into the water and never lift them again. The first time I checked, he was still alive. The second time, he was barely hanging on. The third time, he was gone. So it was just McKissick and me. And we both knew we weren't going to make it much longer. But at least we could talk to each other, keep each other awake, and pray together. We looked up and saw B-29s flying at 30,000 feet, heading to bomb Japan. They were miles above us, completely unaware of what was happening beneath them. Then suddenly we heard a different sound, and we saw a plane coming in low. Lieutenant Chuck Gwynn was out on a search-and-destroy mission in a Ventura patrol bomber. Later he said he thought he'd seen a flash of light. When he dropped down lower, he realized what he was looking at: bodies everywhere, men, debris, sharks circling in every direction. I can still see him in my mind, that plane coming down and circling over McKissick and me 2 or 3 times. I could almost make out his face inside the cockpit as he banked around us. Then he climbed and broke radio silence to contact Commander Adrian Marks, flying a PBY Catalina. It wasn't long before Marks arrived. They told him he couldn't land, that the ocean was too rough and the risk was too high. But Marks said, "We have to land." And his crew backed him up, telling him they'd stand with him no matter what. Marks tried to land by riding a swell, but the moment he touched down, his right propeller was destroyed. The PBY would never fly again. The impact damaged the plane so badly that taking off was impossible. But even crippled, that PBY became a floating lifeboat. Commander Marks and his crew managed to haul aboard about 56 sailors and Marines, giving us a place, however small and crowded, to survive until more help arrived. All they could do was pick up stragglers as the waves pushed us toward them. When I finally got aboard, one of the first faces I saw was Spooner. He had somehow gotten free of the rope I tied him with, grabbed onto the raft again, and lived long enough to be rescued. He looked at me and started talking like we'd just been separated at the grocery store. Then a destroyer arrived, and we were transferred aboard. Out of the 1,200 Marines and sailors who had been on the Indianapolis when she went down, only 316 of us lived long enough to be rescued. I made it back to the United States, exhausted but grateful, and after a slow recovery, I reunited with more than just my parents. That certain brunette I'd been thinking about the whole time had heard the Indianapolis had gone down. She ran to her mother crying, "Mom, Mom, Ed was on that ship." At first all the reports said there were no survivors, but she didn't give up hope. She kept waiting. When I got home, oh, I loved her more than ever. But I felt broken, physically, mentally, and I told her, "I think we need to hold off. I need time to pull myself together, to be worth waiting for." So we waited. And waited. Then finally, one day, we decided it was time. We were married in 1947, 2 years after the sinking of the Indianapolis. For the rest of my life, I shared my story to honor the men who never came home. From that summer of 1945 all the way until I passed in May of 2021, I never stopped thanking the Lord for sparing me in those terrible days. You can't imagine what that gratitude feels like. Even now, whenever I pray, I remember. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord. At 96 years old, still telling the story of His mercy and His grace. Yes, yes, yes.